the moment my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, set a folded quitclaim deed on my kitchen table and told me I had until midnight to sign over my late wife's coastal home to her brother, I made a decision, not an angry one. Not the kind a grieving man makes when his chest feels tight and his hands are shaking. The quiet kind. The kind that comes after you have spent 40 years building a life of precision, quiet strength, and unshakable self-respect. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push the paper back across the polished granite counter. I sat there in my armchair, looked at her arrogant, confident smile, nodded once, and pulled my phone from my pocket. The text I sent to my estate attorney took 9 seconds to type. By 6 o'clock the next morning, as the sun began to rise over the ocean horizon, a deputy sheriff pulled into the driveway to serve an emergency civil lockout order on Vanessa's brother. Let me establish the foundation first, because if I don't, you won't understand why I felt nothing but a clean, mechanical sense of justice when the police cruisers arrived. My name is Robert Miller. I am 62 years old. For 35 years, I worked as a senior structural architect in Charleston, South Carolina, designing commercial waterfront developments and historic restorations across the Low Country. My late wife, Evelyn, and I built our dream home 22 years ago on a 2-acre bluff overlooking the Kiawah River. It was a custom timber frame home with wraparound porches, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a detached guest house set among the live oaks. Evelyn passed away 3 years ago after a courageous battle with illness. That house wasn't just real estate to me. It contained every laugh, every quiet morning, and every memory of the woman who had walked beside me since we were 22 years old. It was fully paid off, held zero debt, and carried a market valuation just north of $2.8 million. My son Brandon was 32. Brandon was a gentle soul, but he possessed a fatal flaw that I had watched with growing concern for 5 years. He was completely, utterly spineless when it came to his wife, Vanessa. Vanessa was 30. She worked as an associate manager at a high-end boutique PR firm in downtown Charleston. She was glamorous, sharp-tongued, and raised by parents who believed that image was everything, and substance was an afterthought. Her younger brother Julian was 27, a chronic underachiever who spent his days drifting between failed sales gigs, living off handouts, and driving a sports car his sister leased for him to maintain the illusion of family wealth. When Brandon married Vanessa 4 years ago, I paid for 80% of the wedding. When they bought their first townhouse in Mount Pleasant, I gifted them $75,000 for the down payment. I didn't do it to buy their affection. I did it because Brandon was my son, and I wanted him to have a solid start. What I didn't realize was that to Vanessa and her family, my quiet generosity was mistaken for vulnerability. If you have been with us for a while, do one quick thing right now. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like on this video, and leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Thank you for supporting our vision, Vengeance Vault team. The conflict began 6 months ago when Julian was evicted from his downtown apartment for non-payment of rent. Instead of helping him find an affordable place or telling him to get a steady job, Vanessa brought Julian directly to my coastal property. She didn't ask if he could stay in the detached guest house. She announced it over a Sunday dinner. "Robert," Vanessa had said, pouring herself a second glass of expensive wine, "Julian is transitioning between business ventures right now. The commute from town is exhausting for him. He is going to move into your guest house for a few weeks until his venture capital funding clears." I looked at Brandon. Brandon was staring intently at his plate, cutting his chicken into tiny pieces. "Julian is welcome to stay for 2 weeks, Vanessa," I said evenly, "provided he keeps the property tidy and doesn't interfere with my work schedule." 2 weeks turned into 2 months. 2 months turned into 6. Julian didn't look for work. He turned the peaceful oak-shaded guest house into a staging ground for loud late-night parties. He parked his leaking sports car on the custom brick pavers, left trash around the lawn, and treated my property like a private country club. When I asked him to clean up after his guests, he offered a condescending smirk and said, "Talk to Vanessa, old man. She handles the family real estate." The disrespect reached a breaking point in late October. I had spent 3 weeks out of town consulting on a historic restoration project in Savannah. When I returned to Kiawah Island on a Tuesday evening, I pulled into my driveway and froze. There was a large commercial sign staked into the manicured front lawn, "For sale by owner, pre-listing showing." Inside the main house, two strangers, a local real estate agent and a wealthy couple, were walking through my living room, measuring wall spaces with digital tape measures. Vanessa was standing near the fireplace, holding a clipboard, pointing out the ocean views. Julian was sitting on my leather sofa in dirty clothes, drinking one of my imported craft beers. I walked through the front door, set my briefcase down, and looked at the real estate agent. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. The agent looked confused. "Mr. Miller, Vanessa told us you were in an assisted living transition and that she was handling the pre-listing valuation for the estate sale." Vanessa's face paled for a fraction of a second, but she instantly recovered her polished, arrogant smile. She stepped between me and the buyers, taking the agent by the arm. "Why don't we step outside to tour the grounds while my father-in-law gets settled? He has been traveling and gets easily confused." I looked the agent dead in the eye. "Get out of my house, now." The buyers, sensing the sudden wall of ice in the room, quickly gathered their folders and hurried out the front door. Once the door clicked shut, Vanessa turned on me, her hands on her hips, her eyes flashing with pure entitlement. "Robert, what is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You just ruined a $2.9 million cash inquiry." "My house is not for sale, Vanessa," I said quietly. "It needs to be for sale," she blurted out, her voice rising in pitch. "You are 62 years old, living alone in a massive house you don't need. Julian needs seed capital for his new commercial logistics firm, and Brandon and I need a larger property in south of Broad. We talked about this. You are hoarding $3 million in equity, while your family is trying to build real wealth." I looked at my daughter-in-law. I looked at the utter lack of shame in her eyes. "Where is Brandon?" I asked. "Brandon agrees with me," she claimed loudly. "He knows it is time for you to downsize into a quiet retirement condo in West Ashley. We even picked out a nice 2-bedroom unit for you near the medical center." I took a slow, deep breath. "Vanessa, leave my home and take your brother with you." She laughed. A loud, bitter, condescending laugh that echoed off the high timber ceilings. "Oh, Robert, don't be naive. You think you can just kick us out? Brandon is your only child. Legally and morally, this family's future rests on how that equity is deployed. We are coming back on Thursday night with the formal paperwork, and you are going to be reasonable." She picked up her designer handbag, motioned for Julian to follow her, and slammed the heavy cypress front door behind them. I didn't scream. I didn't chase them down the driveway. I walked into my study, sat down at my father's old oak desk, and opened my safe. I pulled out the master title deed for the Kiawah Island property, along with my late wife Evelyn's primary estate folder. What Vanessa had completely failed to research, because she viewed me as nothing more than an aging, passive old man, was the precise legal structure under which the property was held. 22 years ago, when Evelyn and I built the house, we created a legal entity called the Evelyn R. Miller Family Heritage Trust. The house was held within this trust. Under the original terms, upon Evelyn's passing, I became the sole managing trustee, with absolute discretionary power over title conversion, life tenancy, and beneficiary designations. Furthermore, the trust contained a specific clause that my attorney had drafted years ago, an irrevocable beneficiary exclusion and asset shield clause. Under this clause, the managing trustee held the absolute, unchallengeable authority to execute a midnight deed transfer that placed the property into a non-probate, protected land trust, permanently excluding any family member who attempted forced liquidation, elder coercion, or unauthorized property encumbrance. On Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, the storm arrived. The rain was falling heavily over the salt marshes of Kiawah Island as Brandon and Vanessa arrived at the house. Julian was with them, wearing a dark suit, looking like a man who was about to collect a debt he believed he was owed. Brandon walked into the living room looking like an absolute ghost. He wouldn't look me in the eye. Vanessa walked straight to the dining table, unzipped her leather portfolio, and set a legal document flat on the table. It was a standardized quitclaim deed, converting the Kiawah property from the Family Heritage Trust into a newly formed LLC controlled jointly by Brandon and Vanessa. "Here is how this works, Robert," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with cold clinical authority. "You sign this quitclaim deed tonight. We file it first thing Friday morning at the county recorder's office. In exchange, we guarantee you a lifetime occupancy lease on the guesthouse, and we allocate $800,000 from the sale proceeds into an annuity for your living expenses." Julian leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "It is a generous deal, old man. Most families would just put you in a home." I looked at my son Brandon. "Brandon, look at me." Brandon flinched, staring down at his wet shoes. "Dad, please." "Vanessa says it is the only way for us to secure the business loans. Julian has a real plan this time. If we don't do this, we lose the deposit on the South of Broad house." "Brandon," I said softly, my voice filled with a profound, quiet sorrow. "Your mother spent 20 years planting those hydrangeas along the porch. She chose every piece of timber in this ceiling. You are asking me to sign away her life's memory so your brother-in-law can fund another failed business." "Don't manipulate him, Robert," Vanessa shouted, stepping between me and Brandon. "Evelyn is gone. This is about the living. You have until midnight to sign that paper. If you refuse, I will file an emergency petition in probate court tomorrow morning, alleging cognitive decline and financial elder neglect. I will have Brandon appointed as your temporary legal conservator by Monday afternoon. You will lose control of this house either way." The room went completely dead silent. The wind howled against the glass doors overlooking the river. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at her arrogant, smug face, a woman who had crossed every boundary of decency, honor, and basic human respect. "I see," I said softly. I picked up the quitclaim deed, looked at it for 3 seconds, and set it back down on the table. "Leave the papers," I said, keeping my tone entirely even. "I need to read through the notary clauses. Come back tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Vanessa smiled, a triumphant, victorious smile that said she believed she had broken me. "Smart choice, Robert. I knew you would see reason when faced with reality. We will be here at 8. She grabbed Brandon by the arm, signaled to Julian, and walked out into the rainy night. The moment the taillights of their SUV disappeared down the long oak-lined driveway, I sat down at the table. I pulled out my phone. It was 9:15 p.m. I called my estate attorney, Arthur Pendleton, at his home number. Arthur had been my legal counsel and close personal friend for 30 years. "Robert," Arthur answered, his voice instantly alert. "What is wrong, Arthur?" I said calmly. "It is time. Activate the exclusion clause on the Evelyn Heritage Trust. Execute the midnight deed transfer to the Coastal Conservation Land Trust with me as the sole life tenant, and draft an immediate civil trespass and lockout order for Julian and Vanessa." Arthur took a deep breath over the line. "Robert, are you sure about this? Once the midnight transfer is recorded in the electronic portal, Brandon's contingent inheritance rights to the real estate are permanently severed. Vanessa will have zero legal standing to ever petition for conservatorship over that asset." "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Arthur," I said. "Do it now." "I will have the electronic filing executed by midnight," Arthur replied, "and I will notify the Charleston County Sheriff's Department first thing in the morning." I hung up the phone. I poured myself a small glass of scotch, walked out onto the covered back porch, and watched the rain fall over the river. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel despair. I felt the clean, mechanical stillness of a man who had built a structure to withstand the hurricane and was now watching the storm break uselessly against the foundation. Friday morning arrived bright, clear, and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the ocean sky washed in brilliant blue. At 7:45 a.m., I sat at my dining room table wearing a fresh sweater, drinking a cup of hot black coffee. On the table in front of me lay a single, stamped legal document from the Charleston County Registrar of Deeds, delivered electronically at 12:01 a.m. At 7:55 a.m., 2 marked Charleston County Sheriff's Department cruisers pulled up the long driveway, their lights flashing silently. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out, accompanied by Arthur Pendleton, who was carrying a black leather briefcase. At 8 o'clock sharp, Vanessa's luxury SUV pulled into the driveway, followed closely by Julian's sports car. Vanessa stepped out of her vehicle wearing a tailored designer coat, holding a gold pen in her hand, expecting to collect her signed $3 million prize. Brandon walked behind her, looking nervous, while Julian sauntered up the porch steps with his hands in his pockets. The moment Vanessa reached the front porch, Deputy Sheriff Miller stepped into her path, crossing his arms. "Ma'am, step back," the deputy said firmly. Vanessa stopped, her eyebrows knitting together in annoyance. "Excuse me, who are you?" This is a private family matter. My father-in-law is signing over the property deed to us this morning. Arthur Pendleton stepped forward from the doorway, pulling a thick document from his briefcase. Miller, Arthur said, his voice cold, dry, and sharp as razor wire. My name is Arthur Pendleton, legal counsel for Robert Miller and the Evelyn R. Miller Heritage Land Trust. You are currently standing on private property owned exclusively by a non-probate conservation entity. Vanessa laughed nervously, looking past the lawyer at me through the front glass doors. What are you talking about? Robert, tell this lawyer to get out of the way. We brought the final notary. As of 12:01 a.m. this morning, Arthur continued, reading directly from the recorded deed, Robert Miller executed the irrevocable beneficiary exclusion clause under Section 9 of the Master Trust. Title to this entire $2.8 million property has been permanently transferred into the Coastal Conservation Land Trust. Vanessa's face went dead white. What does that mean? It means, Arthur said, looking her dead in the eye, that the property no longer exists as a private family asset. It can never be sold, pledged as collateral, liquidated, or transferred through probate. Brandon Miller's contingent inheritance rights have been legally extinguished. Brandon gasped, dropping his keys onto the wooden porch deck. Dad, what did you do? Vanessa's hands began to shake violently. She dropped her gold pen onto the floorboards. No, that is illegal. I am filing the conservatorship papers today. He is non compos mentis. You cannot file conservatorship over an asset held in a master land trust, Mrs. Miller, Arthur replied with a cold smirk. And furthermore, as of 6:00 a.m. today, the Charleston County Magistrate issued an emergency civil trespass and lockout order against you and your brother Julian. Deputy Sheriff Miller stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Julian, step off the porch. You have 15 minutes to gather your personal clothing from the guest house under police escort. Any property left behind after 15 minutes will be impounded. If you or your sister set foot on this parcel again, you will be arrested for felony trespass. Julian's arrogant demeanor shattered into pure pathetic panic. Vanessa, do something! My clothes! My computer is in there! 15 minutes, son, the deputy warned, grabbing Julian by the arm and leading him down the steps toward the guest house. Vanessa turned on me, slamming her fists against the front glass door, her face contorted in a terrifying mix of rage and utter devastation. Robert, you ruined us. We put a non-refundable $50,000 deposit on the South of Broad house based on this sale. Julian's business partners are suing him for breach of contract. You destroyed our entire financial plan. I stood up from the table, walked slowly to the front door, and opened it just a few inches. I looked down at Vanessa. I looked at her expensive coat, her ruined makeup, and the complete destruction of the greedy, manipulative trap she had tried to set for a grieving man. I didn't destroy your plan, Vanessa, I said, my voice calm, even, and entirely devoid of heat. You destroyed it the moment you confused my quiet grace for weakness. You thought you could come into my home, disrespect my late wife's memory, and bully me out of what I spent 40 years earning. Robert, please, she sobbed, her arrogance completely evaporating into desperate pleading. Think of Brandon. He is your son. We can undo the land trust. We can work something out. I looked at Brandon, who was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, weeping quietly, holding his face in his hands. Brandon, I said softly, you are my son, and if you ever want to come to this house alone, sit on the porch and talk to your father. My door is always open, but your wife and her brother will never cross this threshold again. I looked back at Vanessa. Arthur will be serving your employer with a formal notification of your attempted real estate fraud by noon today. I suggest you leave before the deputy returns. I closed the heavy cypress door. The solid deadbolt clicked into place with a sharp, heavy thud. Through the side window, I watched as Deputy Sheriff Miller marched a weeping, disheveled Julian out of the guest house carrying 2 plastic trash bags filled with his clothes. Vanessa was screaming at Brandon in the driveway, shoving him toward the car as their financial world collapsed around them. Within 10 minutes, the engines roared, the gravel kicked up, and the vehicles sped down the long oak driveway, disappearing beyond the front gates. The silence returned to the Kiawah River. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my cup of coffee, and walked out onto the back porch. The morning sun was warming the timber railings and the salt breeze was blowing quietly through the marsh grass. I looked out over the water, took a deep breath of the cold, clean ocean air, and smiled. The storm had passed, the house was secure, and the memory of the life I had built was safe forever.